So I've had some requests from people to more fully detail what exactly it was about The Last Jedi I didn't like. And I will touch on a couple of them. I'll try not to have this video be super long, but these were actually a couple things. My husband and I went to a holiday party last night, actually, and we encountered some of the people that were at the party asked us if we'd seen the new Star Wars, and they said they liked it. And so, of course, that was 100% the wrong thing to say to me, of all people. And I was like, "Rah, rah, rah, rah." And they were like, "Well, why on earth didn't you like it? Like, we liked it just fine." And I said, "Well, are you like a long-term Star Wars fan?" And all of them said no. You know, they just now and then they watched the movies, or they were like they just went there for the entertainment value, or they were just new to the series based on The Force Awakens. And that's I think really that's where you see a large difference. I think a lot of long-term Star Wars fans who actually not just watched the movies from when they originally came out and went through the series and were looking forward to the movies. Those are one type of long-term Star Wars fan, but there's another type of Star Wars fan that are the people like myself and like my husband, right, who love Knights of the Republic, who love the extended universe, who really are into all of the movies and the lore behind it, who love the characters and you grew up with these characters. And I think it's really those kind of people, for the most part, that are having issues with this movie because there are a lot of plot holes and inconsistencies in terms of how it was treated. And I want to say that there's like, if you like this movie, I think that's great. I gotta be honest, I kind of wish I liked this movie because it was very disappointing to me. And as a longtime fan, um, I was let down, in all honesty, and I'm still let down by this movie. And I wish that it had been something that I could have enjoyed and liked, and unfortunately it wasn't. And once I explained the reasons that I didn't like it to the people that were at this party, actually I would say three-quarters of them looked very confused and then thoughtful, and then asked me some more questions about what I had pointed out, and then ended up concluding that upon thinking about it, that it wasn't really a good movie. And I also want to emphasize that you can enjoy a movie and still acknowledge that it's not a good movie, um, which I think is what kind of ended up happening to the people last night. They were like, okay, well, I still enjoyed it, but I acknowledge that in terms of like the Star Wars scope and in terms of general inconsistencies, that this was not a good movie. It was not well executed. So I also want to address something that a lot of people commented on in my first review, and that is that I ruined the movie for myself by having expectations going into it. And I'm going to tell you right now, I really had no expectations walking into this movie. When I watched The Force Awakens, I was not surprised that it was pretty much lifted straight out of A New Hope, because Disney needed to appeal to the nostalgia. They wanted to draw in the people who were fans of the original series. They wanted to make sure it was a little modernized with a new cast and characters to appeal to a new audience, bring them into the Star Wars fold, and then start this new story arc. So I understood walking into The Force Awakens that it was not going to be a very original Star Wars film. And I enjoyed all of the characters. And going into The Last Jedi, the only kind of expectations I had was that they would take care of the open plot threads that had been left in The Force Awakens. Um, there's certain things I had hoped for, because you see, if you're online, you see fan theories. They're unavoidable. If you care enough to watch this review, and if you care enough to be looking at reviews and going to see this movie, then you probably have heard some of the fan theories, and they're not avoidable, really. So there are some fan theories that you hear and you're like, wow, that'd be really cool if that happened. So of course, you may hope for something, but realistically, walking into this movie, I knew that probably none of the fan theories I hoped for were going to happen. So I went in with an open mind to this movie, thinking Force Awakens was the nostalgia factor, establishing the new characters. So this is the movie where they're going to start to really ramp things up, and they're going to start taking off with enlarging on character development, etc. And that is where my expectations were not met. So with that being said, this is a rather lengthy intro of sorts, but I wanted to make it clear that I'm not somebody who went in with this expecting certain storylines. I went in with a pretty open mind, I think, you know, and my open mind being a long-term Star Wars fan, that was what was not satisfied. So the biggest thing that I had a problem with in this movie in general were plot holes and inconsistencies. So character inconsistencies and writing and storyline inconsistencies. So like Poe Dameron, his character wasn't too changed from what it was in the first film, but I do feel like he went from a fairly respectful character who listened to his superiors and was, I would say, decently level-headed to completely being out of control in this movie. And I understand the context of why that happened, but I don't really understand why the character arc was necessary. And I almost thought that he was getting groomed to help take over from Leia, and maybe that will happen in the next movie. I'm not entirely sure, but I had some issues with the portrayal of his character. Leia went from being a very strong-willed, fiery, fury and fire type strong leader who took charge and made decisive actions and was pretty decent at communicating to someone who was very passive. And I did touch on this in my first review, and that also bothered me, along with the fact that I don't mind that Leia had force powers because it is canon that both of the Skywalkers have force powers. What bothered me about it was the way that it was executed and the fact that after she brought herself back to life and forced her way back into the ship, that they just opened the door and never acknowledged at all what happened. And maybe it's because they didn't have time. Like, I'll play devil's advocate here. Maybe it's because they're going to address it in the next video, the next sequel or something. But it really seemed out of context to me, and I had thought for sure with Carrie Fisher's passing that would be a very graceful tribute to kind of see her off, and instead they kept her alive, and I'm just anticipating getting some kind of horrendous CG rendering in the next movie of her, and it's just very confusing to me. Part of me thinks that they did it just so they didn't, because everybody kind of expected they would need to kill her off, so it kind of felt like they did it just to be like, yeah, we're not killing her off after all, we surprised you, it's a twist. It's not really a twist. Like, you just substituted one Skywalker twin for the other, and it just felt very off, and it was never acknowledged by anyone else. And I've heard people mock fans for being sad that Akbar was just kind of killed off like that when he was, in all fairness, he was a kind of minor character, but he was also one of the larger minor characters that was acknowledged by the fandom and by people outside of the fandom. He was a major internet presence with the meme, it's a drop. So, they couldn't have given Holdo's part to him. Like, I didn't have a problem with Holdo as a character that existed there. Like, I would have been, I didn't like that she didn't share her plan, because why wouldn't she? I don't understand. I'll get into that later, but what was the point of just killing him off and then not even acknowledging it? That was one of my larger issues that they mishandled, and I think the biggest character inconsistencies, other than Luke, and I honestly don't think I need to expand on this, I think everyone knows at this point that Luke's character, even acknowledged by Mark Hamill, was seemingly very out of sync with how Luke was in all of the former movies and his character, and why he would just react on a hair trigger to sensing some kind of darkness in Kylo Ren, because this is the same person that willingly turned himself over to Vader and Palpatine to try and turn Vader back to the light side. And it's very confusing the way that they handled Luke's character. And I did enjoy the fight at the end, but the way that he kind of just went into the night again, I feel like of the two Skywalker twins that should have existed, and if one had to pass in this movie, it would have made far more sense for Carrie Fisher to pass. And part of me wonders if they killed off Luke just because Mark Hamill was very outspoken about the fact that he was unhappy with the way that they were taking the character. You know, like, okay, Mark, you're not happy with what we're doing with Luke? Well, then you're dead. You're officially out of the movies unless we decide to bring you back as a ghost. And when he issued his statement about saying, like, oh, I regret, you know, mentioning a couple little differences, bro, those were not a couple little differences. Like, there are compilation videos, some of you guys sent them to me in comments, where he is just like, yeah, Luke, nah. And there's a couple scenes where, in interviews, where he was like, I'm paraphrasing, but he was like, yeah, remember kids, you know, Hollywood doesn't make movies for fans or story anymore, they're made for money. And those aren't just a couple little statements that are made by a major actor. Like, those are, that's a serious thing to think about. And part of me wondered if he was pressured into saying, like, into his like pseudo retraction. You know, I kind of wonder what goes on behind the scenes. But that was a major inconsistency. And in terms of other character inconsistencies, again, I feel like I know Rey and Kylo and Finn and Poe and even that Rose character. Granted, Rose was introduced in this movie, but in general, I feel like they were less developed than they were previously. So that I thought was a huge failing of the movie. And in terms of plot inconsistencies, I mean, I've touched on this before. I have like a list I'm looking at in case you guys are like, what the heck is she looking at? So one of the big ones that bothered me, and it wasn't really that big in terms of pertinence to the plot, was the, you know, the evil seaweed of doom on the island with Luke and Rey. Like, they built it up like it was this massive dark force underneath the island. And I get the parallel when Rey goes to see it between the scene where Luke goes in the cave and he confronts, you know, the image of Vader, and he kind of confronts that in himself, but it wasn't done well. And Rey didn't confront anything. It was just her looking in a mirror and going, who are my parents? And they just showed her herself. And they had built it up by Luke and by the characterization on this island, that it was like this really deep, dark well in the forest, and you needed to avoid it and, you know, stay away from it. And nothing really happened. And, you know, Rey saw nothing and didn't get really any answers. And that would have been fine if it had been handled differently. Like, I would have been able to accept that entire sequence where she interacted with that part of the Force like that, just like I did when Luke did it in the cave. But they way overbuilt it. And then when it happened, it was so anticlimactic that it was just a letdown, and it seemed very flawed to me, the way that it was executed. You know, the next issue I had was pacing in terms of the casino stuff, and everybody has talked about this. I didn't understand the need for any of the casino stuff. I didn't understand the need for the plot with Finn and Rose, and I honestly, it bothers me, and I feel as though they did the character of Finn a great disservice. And he was one of the primary new characters in this film, and they just kind of shoved him off on this bullshit side casino mission with this new character, Rose. And I don't mind Rose. I think her hair is fucking stupid. But she looks like somebody, like, it looks like Rian Johnson was watching some of his favorite anime and was like, oh, that's a good idea. Let's give her like little flips on the side and a ponytail. She's going to look just like my favorite, you know, Doki Doki schoolgirl character or whatever. But I liked her character other than that. I just thought the whole thing was heavy-handed and ridiculous, and it was overdrawn, it was boring, it was easily avoidable in terms of the story. And the plot, it amounted to absolutely nothing. And considering how long the movie was, like, I feel like movies are getting a lot longer these days. And that was over 2.5 hours, just by a little bit. It was like 2 hours, 33 minutes or something. But that was a whole sequence that went nowhere, preaching about animal abuse and capitalism and all this. Like, we get it. We know that the First Order is encouraging these behaviors. You could have shown that some other way. You know, I mean, if you want to show about like the rich profiting off of the poor, throw a hut in there or do something else. Just the whole thing was way overdrawn. And then the animal race, it felt so dumb. It literally made me feel like I was watching, like, what is it? The Lion King comes to mind, but that was, I mean, hell, that animal race where the dad was stampeded, that was worse than it. I mean, it was more emotional than this scene was. I just thought it took forever. I thought it was not necessary. It was boring AF. I could not believe that I was watching this included in a Star Wars film at all. And then Benicio del Toro's character, I feel like the whole thing was just to give him his feature in the movie. And I didn't understand the point of him other than as a convenient plot device. And I felt like he was kind of wasted in this movie. And I didn't know, I thought, is he supposed to be like the Lando of this film? Is he going to come back? Like, is he going to be important in the next film? Is this going anywhere? Because I kind of felt like if not, that was a major waste. And I didn't understand the need to jam in a romance between Finn and Rose. They knew each other for what, like 12 hours? And I just, I didn't understand why it was necessary, and part of me kind of just felt like, there was some talk of people were like, oh, I hope Finn and Poe are a couple, and that'd be good representation for the LGBTQ community. And I feel like Disney or Rian Johnson or Kathleen Kennedy had an overreaction to that, and they were like, no, we're gonna give Finn a terrible romance, so you know for sure he's straight because that's what's going on. And I can't come up with any other reason why they would throw in this random romance other than to try and create like a love triangle with Finn and Rey and Rose in the next movie, which why is that necessary? Like I think the romances in Star Wars have traditionally been like the massive weak points of these movies. I mean, other than Han and Leia, because that's just like the classic romance that we had, in the original trilogy, and I just can't comprehend why it was needed. And that really bothered me. I didn't think it needed to be included. I thought that it made both of the characters look ridiculous, and it was handled poorly. Let's see, what else did I not like? Rey waiting for Luke to train her took way longer than necessary, and he said he was going to give her 3 lessons. I don't remember ever seeing the last lesson. If there was a lesson that I missed, please let me know. I remember 2 lessons, and then I remember her just kind of like beating him somehow with a stick and taking off. The ending felt fast forwarded to me. They somehow couldn't quite catch up to the resistance the whole movie. But then at the end, magically, they somehow set up this like enormous cannon and catch up to them immediately when they're on the planet. Like, how come the resistance couldn't just hyperspace closer to the planet? How come Holdo didn't hyperspace sooner into their ship? And so speaking of the hyperspacing, that made no sense to me. So first of all, if that was possible, why didn't they just hyperspace a ship through the Death Star or through any of those cruisers? Or conversely, the First Order has never appeared to give a rat's ass about any of their stormtroopers or their troops. Why didn't they just send the stormtroopers out on some kind of kamikaze mission to hyperspace through all of the resistance ships? And why didn't they just do that near the end when they were trying to go for the ships in the first place? Like, if that was a feasible weapon and tactic that could be used in the Star Wars universe, why was it never used before, especially when they've made a point of saying that the First Order really has no consideration given for the lives of its peons? So that did not make sense to me. I don't understand how, if all of the ships around the large cruiser exploded when Holdo hyperspace through it, A, how did the Millennium Falcon survive? B, if they hyperspace through the middle of the cruiser and there was flames and everything was kind of exploding and all the ships around the huge cruiser blew up and the cruiser itself was just decimated, how did Finn and Rose and Phasma and all of those stormtroopers survive when they were in the hold? And I understand, I've heard an argument from someone saying, well, it was a really big ship. I understand it was a big ship, all right? What I don't understand is how if all the other little ships around the big ship blew up from the force of the hyperspace, how did everything inside that ship not blow up or depressurize? Like, that's what I don't understand. It just doesn't seem logical to me. And I've had people tell me stop trying to apply logic to Star Wars. And I understand that, there's a lot of suspension of disbelief in Star Wars, but they're asking for too much in this. It's just, everything is a little bit too convenient. How did Rey even get off the ship? How did Rey and Kylo and Hux survive, for that matter? I just, during the fight with Snoke, you mean to tell me Snoke had his eyes closed and that's how Kylo tricked him? It didn't seem plausible to me, and this is going on to my next issue of Snoke in general. I didn't know who he was. I didn't know why I needed to care about the First Order. I didn't know. I wanted to know how. Let me back up. So this is part of Kylo Ren's character development. I wanted to know how Snoke reached Kylo Ren. I wanted to know why Kylo had gone with him, what was the history behind it, who was Snoke, how did he infiltrate Kylo at Luke's Jedi Academy, how did they manage to convert the Knights of Ren, and they were never mentioned in the movie either or shown. And if they are the Knights of Ren, why wouldn't they have been with Kylo Ren this whole time? But I just don't understand, it's not just that I want to know more about Snoke, and Snoke in the grand scheme of the story arc doesn't have to be important, but I think what is important about Snoke and why it bothers me that I didn't know more about him is that knowing more about Snoke and his relationship with Kylo and who he was as a character really helps to round out who Kylo Ren is and why and how Luke may have acted the way he did as they portrayed it in the movie. And that is a gaping issue with this film because you have smoothed over or erased a large part of what established Kylo and his character to be the way it is as we are trying to invest in this trilogy. And that's why I had a big problem with it. And if they had hyped up Snoke to be so powerful, again, how did he simply close his eyes and that's how Kylo tricked him? And I know the theory is Kylo's supposed to be super powerful and that's why, but it just didn't make a lot of sense to me. And, I don't mind so much that Snoke died. And I thought it was actually I enjoyed that he died. It's always enjoyable when a villain dies, but I sincerely think that Rian Johnson and Kathleen Kennedy should have taken a leaf out of George R.R. Martin's book in terms of how to create a really hated villain and then kill them off, because you want to get people emotionally invested in your story. You got to really make this guy hateable, and I just didn't know why I was supposed to care enough that he was dead. Other than that, they were like, hey, he's evil. Now he's dead. Are you happy about it? I was like, well, I guess I am. I'll take your word for it. I don't really know why I was supposed to care. That's my big issue. The last thing that I'll talk about, and I'm sure I've missed a couple of the points of the issues I had with this, was that the humor was a little campy and a little heavy-handed. And I've seen people making memes that mock fans like myself that are saying that the humor was a little too much. And some of the memes are referencing, for example, Yoda making a comment or something to Luke. And some of the memes that I've seen as examples of humor in Star Wars, in the context of the movie from which the screenshot was taken, those were not supposed to be jokes. So I don't mind a joke here and there, but Star Wars as a whole is a very dark series. It's a space opera. It's a drama. It's about the eternal struggle of good versus evil. You have Jedi and Sith. You've got one government versus another government that's attempting to resist them and restore order to the galaxy. And it's not the Avengers. And I understand that Disney's probably looking at the Avengers and going, this is what audiences are looking at. DC tried to be serious, and their movies are just tanking horrendously at the box office. So we're going to go this way with Rian Johnson and humor, and we're going to make it funny. And the reason why that's not working is because Star Wars has been around for decades, and everyone knows it is not a comedy. It's not campy. It is a very serious series. And some of the humor would be fine, but going overboard with it is just, it's too much. And a lot of the jokes felt so forced. Like nobody in the theater I was in was laughing. And it was obvious moments where they would kind of like pause the dialogue in the movie. You know, they give you like a beat or two after an intended joke for people to laugh. And so they'll laugh and then they don't miss what is being said afterward. And everybody in the theater that I was in was just very awkwardly silent during probably 75% of these forced jokes. And it just felt very off. And I felt it was just, I was like, this is trying too hard to be like the Avengers. And I said it to my husband a couple times, and I said it to other people, and they were like, yeah, that's exactly what it is. It felt like they were trying to make Avenger type jokes. And it's unfortunate. I mean, it's not, Star Wars has not historically been a bucket of lols, right? It's a serious series with a little bit of dark humor sprinkled in here and there. And I just felt like it was kind of out of place. And there were some other funky things in there, like the Jesus Christ, the space cow breast milking situation. I have tried so hard to wipe this from my memory, and people keep asking me what I felt about it. And you know, I've had a lot of people tell me that this is supposed to be a kids movie, and what was I expecting from the plot? But no, it's not supposed to just be a kids movie. And if it was, why would you take the most disgustingly realistically rendered and diseased looking alien tits and have Luke Skywalker creepily suckle them and milk them in great detail with a creepy look on his face while he made eye contact with the camera and with Rey? Like, it was horrendous. It was horrifying. It was disgusting. It was the most out of place inclusion I think I've ever seen. I want to pretend that didn't happen. I honestly, I mean, I still want to pretend like this whole movie didn't happen. But I really want to pretend that didn't happen. And as soon as I'm finished talking about this, I'm going to do my damn best to wipe it out of my memory because it was horrifying. And then one of the other things I didn't understand was the shirtless Kylo Ren moment, or Kylo Ren and Rey moment. And I will say one thing that I did think that this film did well was inclusion of different races and more women in addition to men and more aliens without making it incredibly in your face and blatant and obvious. Unfortunately, the way that they handled the character interactions was heavy-handed. And I know a lot of people had problems with that, but I do feel like, you know, just bringing in different, you know, fighters and pilots and different members of the Resistance and in the First Order as well, it didn't feel like they were really mashing it in your face that it was, that they were including more people. And I enjoyed that there was more inclusion. That was about the only thing I think they did well. And I said to my husband, the only other thing that I really liked was that none of the characters were hypersexualized, because often in fantasy, you know, you have a lot of skimpily dressed characters, or they really glorify, like in the Avengers, they really glorify like Captain America. There's always got to be some kind of scene where he's got his shirt off and he's got 20 billion abs or whatever, you know. And for the most part, I thought they did a good job handling that in this movie, with the exception of the random swole Kylo Ren scene. And it was so awkward that nobody in our audience knew how to handle it. We didn't know how to handle it. Like, my family keeps sending me those ridiculous swole Kylo Ren memes where he's just like out to here for some reason. And I mean, that's nice, Adam Driver, you do you and you work out and everything. But it was like, why was that included? And I read an article and they said that they showed that he was shirtless because they wanted the audience to know how much of him that Rey could see. And when they started doing their like back and forth duo chat, you know, through the Force, it was kind of confusing at first because there was no visual or audio trigger for you to immediately go, okay, they're seeing each other. It was just the camera cutting back and forth like somebody was Skyping. And maybe that was the intent, but you didn't have to show him with his shirt off in the shower, like, and make that weird, awkward, forced, humorous joke where she was flustered that he was shirtless. You know, that felt really fan fiction-y to me. You could have just blurred out the background a little bit the whole time that they were talking to each other, and I think we would have all gotten the gist of what she could see. So that felt very flimsy to me. Um, so I'm going to stop talking about it at this point. What I would like to see of this movie is a fan recut. You know, there's a lot of fan recuts of The Phantom Menace and the prequels. And let me just quickly interject right here. I like the prequels. There are people that have been getting very upset at me in the comments saying I hate the prequels and how dare I. And I like the prequels. I got into Star Wars because I saw Phantom Menace when I was very young. My father took me to the theater because he loved Star Wars and he wanted to show my brother and I Star Wars. So he took us to see the Phantom Menace. And when you're a kid, you know, you don't recognize all of the other issues with the movie at the time. And I loved it. I saw it as a kid and I've watched it as an adult. And there are scenes in the prequels and there are pacing in the prequels that are cringy, to be honest. Like anything with Anakin and Padme, I mean, it's very cringy to me. But the prequels have a lot of good stuff. They have a lot of very interesting characters, and I thought they were very important in terms of setting up the snowball of how the galaxy was taken over by the Sith. And I thought that was a very interesting thing to watch and witness how Anakin kind of turned the way he did. But, you know, there are fan recuts of the prequels that smooth and streamline the storyline in a way that people that don't like the movies appreciate. And in this case, I think I would really appreciate a fan recut of this movie that would make it a little more tolerable for me or make it a little easier for me to accept that this movie came out. Although I honestly still wish that they would retract this and make a new one. And for the people that are telling me that I am one of the people that are going to cause Disney to drop the franchise, that's not true. Disney is making billions of dollars off this movie. And me as one person on YouTube sharing the issues I have with this movie are not going to make Disney cancel the franchise. All right? Disney is a behemoth of the industry. And as long as they think that Star Wars is going to make them money, they're going to keep churning out Star Wars movies. I don't think you have anything to worry about. What I do hope is that the people who work at Disney, such as Kathleen Kennedy, such as Rian Johnson, will see the fan input like this and take it and then try and use it to make smarter or more constructive decisions going forward. And I'm not saying that they need to bow to the whim of the public. What I'm saying is if you can explain to a company the problems with the product that they are offering, and if enough people point out the problems and say, I liked this product, but here is where you need to improve, if enough people speak up, maybe they will improve it. And that's what I think a lot of people are hoping, like me, who are making videos like this and trying to explain what the issues were with these movies that we had. It is that we're hoping that they understand and that they improve. It's not that we want the series to tank. And I know I don't speak for everyone. I don't want Star Wars to go away. I just want it to be true to the original stories, the way that one would hope they would be. You know, that's really, I think, the crux of the issue. So those are some more specific reasons on the issues I had with this movie. And I don't hate the movie. Like, it was just insanely disappointing. And I will not go and see another one in the theaters. I will not be buying this movie. You know, I cannot, in all honesty, support this because it just was a very disappointing film to me. However, I understand, I acknowledge that other people really enjoyed it. And there are long-term Star Wars fans that did really enjoy it. And I think that's great. You know, not everyone's going to like the same movie. It's just how the way the world works. So I'm going to stop here. I think I've said enough about this. If you guys want to see more of me talking about this or watching me play games or doing nerdy things, feel free to subscribe. I'm also on Twitch, twitch.tv/travelerswarden. And I hope that this answers a couple questions and addresses some of the issues that I had brought up to me in the comments of my original video. All right, I hope you guys have a wonderful new year and happy start to 2018. Bye.